Today, we are delighted to share with you information on our new leadership development solution, Navigating Leadership with Connections, which is centered around the importance of connections with employees, of course. My name's Ed. I'm going to be looking after you again today, Senior Principal Consultant for UK and Ireland Leadership Development Team. And I'm going to be walking you through the remainder of the program approach that we have around this Navigating Leadership with Connections. A lot has been written about today's ever-evolving workplace. We know that effective leadership is essential for fostering those positive and productive working environments. But what does it really mean now in today's world of work? Well, McKinsey and we would LHH would endorse this, of course, has suggested that what is required is a new approach to leadership. This means moving away from sort of task-based, transactional into that more deeper, more meaningful connections with our employees. Taking time to really understand one another on a personal level, sharing common values, beliefs, hopes and fears. And therefore, what we will do, therefore, is create an environment where individuals can unleash that full potential, can reveal their full potential. Great, but what makes this difficult for us? We are wired for protectionism, for survival, and this style of leadership can feel really quite uncomfortable for some people, resulting in more of a fear-based reaction that sort of drives them back to the old habits of more sort of transactional and directive, because that sort of feels more certain. So when we feel we need to be more adaptable, we're least able to adapt. But the research does show that if we're going to unleash this full human potential in organizations, leaders must be able to create the environment of belonging and trust and develop that compassionate relationship with their people. Let's turn our attention now to the connections piece. That's why we're here. That's what we're talking about. Even some really cracking research by Gartner's top HR priorities for 2024 and others reveal that leaders are really struggling right now to connect in a meaningful way with their employees. Our solution, the Navigating Leadership with Connections, provides tangible strategies for leaders to address the barriers to building these meaningful connections with their people. So this is the last of the two tasters, just to orientate you in, and if you're still sort of just arrived. Yesterday we had a cracking conversation around building meaningful performance conversations, the sort of practical elements of that, and I'll orientate this within the program in a moment, and talking about being mindful of imposter syndrome. On the agenda today, we're talking about building trust with hybrid teams. I'm going to start with that one because actually what flows within that is actually a style of leadership that's really important. There's, of course, being an empathetic leader and building belonging as well. Really crucial. What's emerged since the pandemic has become front and center, certainly for 2024, are these three themes of human-centered leadership. So under this, so we've got caring, connection, and coaching. And in order for us to inform these three areas, what we see is really crucial is a sort of programmatic approach of 5 central sessions supported by peer-to-peer accountability sessions. These are sort of recap sessions and actually what am I finding easy and what am I finding more difficult around this subject matter, and a psychometric with suggesting strength scope, a very positive and forward-looking psychometric. And indeed, the meaningful performance conversations does lean into a strengths-based approach with performance management. So the main program is going to cover these topics: empathetic leader, being mindful of imposter syndrome, building trust within hybrid teams, building belonging, and meaningful performance conversations. All under the banner of caring, connection, and coaching. But why? Why these? Why do we think that these will help inform those 3 top banners: caring, connection, and coaching? Well, let's start off with empathy. We're going to talk about this one certainly today. Last November, Harvard Business Review published an article on how empathy is absolutely crucial to building trust and for mental health within the workplace. Actually, though, research shows that only 47% of employees say that their leaders actually practice empathy. And there's this gap between the leader's perception, I'm being empathetic, and actually what the employees really experience. So there's a real gap in that sort of understanding there of what is going on. This to us presents a really great development opportunity. It's crucial in leadership, and actually employees do want sympathetic leadership. Empathetic leadership, with 83% of Gen Z workforce saying actually they're willing to change jobs if they could get a better, more compassionate workplace. Imposter syndrome, we touched on that yesterday. Research shows that imposter syndrome is the #1 performance inhibitor. Nearly 62% of knowledge workers experience imposter syndrome, contributed to that lack of confidence, fear of failure, and burnout. Prevalent amongst organizations. What are our leadership cadre doing to help themselves experience it, but also their people as well? Hybrid trust. There appears, certainly from the latest Gartner study, there's a mutual distrust between leaders and their employees, with actually only 63% of organizations saying they really trust their employees. And I'll be interested to get your view on that in a moment. And 53% of employees trusting their organization. We're going to talk about AI in a moment as well. How might that enable the hybrid and remote working? How might that propel that current way of working forward even further? I'll talk about that in a moment. And then we've got belonging. LHH did quite a lot of work on this last year about the importance of belonging while we were informing our studies on team effectiveness. And Gartner affirmed that actually cultural success within organizations is based on alignment and connectedness. Alignment, where employees know the culture, they believe in it, and they demonstrate the behaviors of the culture. But they must feel, of course, that they belong within that culture. We all know what it's like to feel excluded, whether we have at work. We've certainly felt it within maybe our educational context, when we were back at school and so on, doing sports, maybe not getting picked at lunchtime for, playing football or whatever, and being often sometimes the last person picked. You're thinking, am I being picked because because they've got to? People really do perform at their best and give that discretionary effort when they know that they belong. And certainly, the opposite is, of course, true. Traditionally, people tended to feel that connected through that physical proximity. But now what we're seeing is this: we need to connect through emotional proximity on hybrid teams. But leaders are still looking at those old work models that are no longer so fit for purpose. And finally, that bookend there that we actually started talking about first yesterday around performance conversations. I quote McKinsey again. It is so crucial, this. We're in the midst of a profound shift on how work gets done. One that asks leaders to go beyond being controllers with a mindset of certainty to becoming coaches who operate with a mindset of discovery and foster continual rapid exploration, execution, and learning to find out what employees want. A study by Gartner last October 23, found that less than 1 in 3 employees know how to progress their career within the next 5 years. Leaders struggling with the competing demands of getting stuff done and results, and showing some compassion here. But meaningful performance conversations that are well structured, well researched, both bringing stuff to the party, can really, really help unseat that. So we've covered off imposter syndrome. We've talked about performance conversations. Let's turn our attention to fulfilling all of those threes around caring, connection, and coaching by talking about building trust, belonging, and the empathy. Let's get into these 3 key pieces there. So that will complete our jigsaw. So building trust on hybrid teams. Let's talk about the necessity around this. Interesting. For me, this material, and actually, in some ways, I don't think it will surprise you really, has been requested time and time again over the past 2 years. How do we build these connections with hybrid teams, ensuring that the leader is being equitable? And I'll talk about this again in a moment, about information, communication, and connecting with everyone with parity on their team. We need to be more deliberate, proactive with this as leaders. It's not just going to come to us when we've got people dispersed, some at home, some coming in the office. So on the main program, we'll deep dive into how to engage and the types of communication we have available to us. And are we using the right ones at the right time to achieve that? Not heard from you. I think it's time to do that. So Meda's got a little poll. And why did we show you this? Because of course it's a taster. And what we like to do is sort of sense check the participants there, whether we're doing it virtually like this or we're just talking to people in the room there. So we've got a little poll we're gonna launch for you now, Meda, if you're good for that. And thank you for all the voting yesterday on yesterday. Oh, we're off. Some good scores coming in there. As a leader, what's your level of trust in your hybrid employees? We know that it's from that research that only 63% trust their employees, though we haven't got a gauge from 1 to 5. So really, really keen to see that. So what's going in here? Little bit of trust. There's a couple of the little bit of trust. What are they doing? Are they watching Netflix? I was talking to a friend of mine years ago who actually had the opportunity. It was quite rare to do some remote work. And he said, and I'd visited him on a Friday, and he said, I said, should you be working? He said, oh, yeah, well, they just check if I log in. And he showed me, and he had a weight resting on a key. And he said, as long as a key's being depressed, it shows that I'm working, which I thought that's just not good, really. You know, that's not a good way forward. So actually, what are we looking at here? Reasonable level of trust. It's pretty good. An absolute trust there at 16. And thank you so much for sharing your views on that. And again, that's just to get a little bit of engagement here, but just as I say, sense checking what we would do on a main program there, sharing the results there. So most had a reasonable level of trust. Pretty good. Okay. Let's move on then. Let's move on. Let's discuss a little bit of that's how you see things. Let's discuss a little bit more around leadership and trust and what does the research actually say. Of course, the COVID pandemic forced a massive shift towards remote and hybrid. Of course it did, goes without saying. We're now seeing, of course, and you can see that on news, organizations wanting to bring the workers back into the office. And most are going for this hybrid model where employees are splitting their time, whether the employees are deciding that or they bowl that out with their manager and so on. Because often what's happened is offices have downsized, so people have to book desks as well, making that sort of floor space much more limited and much more difficult to achieve. And what I'm seeing when I'm doing my hybrid development training is normally around a 2-3. That's what this be. 2 days at home, 3 days in the office. But this does present our leaders and managers with a major challenge. How do we ensure productivity when we can't physically see their employees? And I'll talk about some of the things that are going on psychologically for us here around the bias and what's playing out in leaders' minds. So this is quite nice. Some research by Microsoft here found that actually 85% of managers have trouble trusting workers to be productive when they're working remotely. And more concretely, 49% of managers of hybrid workers struggle to trust their employees to do their best work. So this lack of trust in worker productivity has left Microsoft researchers terming this element called productivity paranoia, where leaders fear that lost productivity is due to the employee simply not working when they're at home, even though, and as I'll come back to the psychology of this, more hours seem to be worked. There are more meetings, although because of the medium, inevitably there's a lot more of those Zoom and team meetings. But actually, other metrics of productivity have increased. Counter to this, workers with full schedule flexibility report 29% more productivity and 53% greater ability to focus than workers that have no ability with their flexibility of their schedule. And that's literally just been released by Future Forum. Justine, interesting. Maybe this be because our leaders are less productive at their best and judging others by their own behavior. Yeah, and I hear that, Kelly, as well about working at home is the only time I can get stuff done. And it's interesting when you actually go in and look at people in an office. They tend to do is try and reproduce often what they're doing at home by either sitting in a booth, putting headphones on, and just getting on with their work. Thank you for the interaction there. That's lovely to see that. Let's talk about hybrid work then, and some of the productivity and some of what the research says here. And yes, we can see that the prevailing wind is really hybrid, but there is a big move to try and encourage people to get back into those offices. But what does the research tell us? What we are seeing is actually research suggests the hybrid model is more effective than on-site work on its own. All these great benefits are there. The one thing that I was really surprised with this research is more collaboration, because people tend to sort of say, oh, well, you've got to get in the office because it's a good place to collaborate. And I think what's happened is with hybrid is people have found a way of being saying, well, we're going to be deliberate with our collaboration. We're going to be proactive when we do that and really understand when we're doing it and making it discreet. And of course, hybrid is not just about working from home, but there is time in that office as well. The data certainly tells some interesting stories here. Peer review research for Stanford University was for a NASDAQ listed company. And they randomly assigned call center employees. They said, right, you're at home, you're at work, and let's look at you over 9 months. Let's see what the productivity is like. And of course, it does depend on the role, of course. Those working from home resulted in a 13% increase in performance due to less sick days, better retention, more convenient place to work. And in fact, the attrition rate dropped by 50%. Likewise, there were some similar studies on programmers, finance, and marketing employees, where attrition went down by 35% and 8% more code was actually produced. Another one, Chicago University said actually 6 out of 10 of our employees reported they were more productive, with 14% saying they were less productive. Keen to hear those. Good to see some chat coming in there. Yeah, there's an interesting one I'm seeing here about too many meetings, and this is about asynchronous and synchronous, and we talk about that on the program. That actually you've got to give people time just to work and concentrate on stuff, focus time, but then bring in those meetings at discrete times. You can't just and I remember working. I was facilitating a major bank, and during that sort of post lockdown, and they just had meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting. Really interesting. How I haven't got time to do any of my work because I'm constantly in Teams meetings. And that's obviously synchronous because you're actually dealing with people real time. You need the asynchronous, which a lot of people have come across when you're stepping away from that and actually getting your work done. There has to be a healthy balance. Okay, over to you. There's some great stuff coming in here. Thank you so much. What have you seen just in the chat here? What do you think some of the barriers are to that trust in hybrid teams? Although I do get it on those that are joining the call here are very open and actually are trusting. What do you think people might say? I think is probably an easy one if they don't necessarily trust their people. What's their concerns there? Keen to hear some of your views around that. What's going on? Yeah, Lee, that's like preconceived ideas of what will and won't necessarily work. You've got to come in and do this. Why? I don't know. No idea, but you've got to be in. Um, so yeah, there's a bit about, and I'll mention this in the moment about where's all that coming from. It's preconceived ideas, programming around trust. There's some stuff, not having clear goals and objectives set, presenteeism rather than managing outcomes. Shirley, you must have seen my slides. Brilliant. Junior team members are voicing they need team members in to help their progression. Yeah, and do you know what? There is something that I think Sadiq Khan was saying, look, new generation of accountants and lawyers, they do need to bake themselves into a culture there. There is a degree of argument, but is that a hybrid model where actually they do have 1 day of flexibility there, but it just needs to be sort of lent into there? Yeah, one bad apple there. That's really an interesting one there. They don't know them well. they don't build rapport, and hence the trust isn't there. So Astrid, you're right. They don't know their people, and so if that trust doesn't flow, they haven't got spent time getting to know each other. Let's just for purposes of time, because I've got all sorts of things to talk about here. But thank you so much for all those that have engaged on that. I really appreciate it. These are some of the hybrid leadership challenges that do speak to the issue around trust, whether it's building that personal relationship that has been mentioned on the chat there. How do I keep an eye on task progress and the quality of work? Of course, we can do this. I work more from home, so you're remote. Do I feel connected? How do you build culture or bake people into that culture? If they join an organization and work permanently remotely, is that always a good way forward? Of course, you have to think about what do people need and where do they need to receive or receive that experience? Is it in the office or back at home? How are decisions made? You may have more clarity of that, I guess, if you're constantly in the office. You might not, actually, to be fair. Understanding what motivates each individual. So interesting one that was mentioned there, sort of about, do you actually really know your people? And therefore, if you don't know your people, can trust flow? What I always say to people that I was in the military for 14 years, and one of the things they used to say in the military is you can't build trust at the line of departure. The line of the departure is when you step forward, and from that point, you can expect to be in some sort of combat or enemy situation. You don't line up with your team, look left and right and go, right, are you all with me? Sorry, I know I don't know your name, and I know I don't really speak to you very much, but are you with me? No, not really. We need to build trust and be really proactive with this every single day. As I said before, let's talk a little bit about bias and false impressions. Most of the data research is pointing towards actually people generally are more productive working from home. But leaders are taught traditionally to evaluate employees by what they see. And I think this has really come out in the chat. So when employees are not in front of people, this can cause uncertainty and distrust. According to an MIT Sloan review, even before the pandemic, the focus on presence in the office undermined any effective attempt at this remote working arrangement. Thus, researchers sort of found that remote employees who work just as hard and just as long as those in the office on similar roles just ended up getting lower appraisal evaluations, decreased raises, and less opportunity for promotion. Headphones are sliding off my head. Let's get those back on. So reasons for distrust. These biases can create a degree of false impressions here. So what have we got here? First of all, proximity bias. Many of you, if you're into leadership development yourself, will have heard about proximity bias as one of the big things that's coming out from hybrid, favoring people who buy you in the office. They're closest to power. Okay, so I work with this person in the office. I see them every day. They're really good. This is the person I want to promote or give that pay rise to, as opposed to someone at home who's working just as well. The other two are really interesting here as well, the anchoring bias. So first piece of information a person receives is the piece of information they're going to overly rely on. So we must be able to see our employees to know that they are actually being productive. So leaders are basically taught to evaluate productivity based on simple presence in the office, and they will stick to that information. Even if you slide a piece of paper and they say, look, I can show you here, they've been just as productive, if not more. No. It's a mental blind spot. And also this confirmation bias is looking for discrete pieces of information that reconfirm their beliefs and ignore information that is actually against this. So seek out information that in office is much more productive, even when there's strong evidence that actually those off doing remote or hybrid are equally, if not more, productive. So they're trusting gut reaction and internal impressions and intuitions over those facts. So what's the consequence of all this then? And this is what I was at a British Psychological Society conference today. We were talking about this. Yeah, absolutely, Justine. Really good point there. That workers are being forced, are being asked to go back into the office when there's no real explicable advantage. Um, and there's something that flows from this. I just want to quickly share with you. There's a story attached to this, actually, that although this is 22 research from the Society for Human Resources, found that 50% of people will definitely seek a full-time remote position for their next job. So what I'm talking about here is speaking to retention and recruitment. To get people to stay in a hybrid job with a 30-minute commute, employees would have to give 10% pay rise. This is just some research I thought was quite interesting. And for a full-time on-site role, they would have to put 20% more salary across that table to get them with the same commute. So you say, right, what are you going to give me for that extra deemed inconvenience now? I was talking to a recruiter, it's just before Christmas, and she was saying to me, she said, I've got this really great job. HR director, good remuneration, really good salary. I said, I've got a problem. They want them in the office 5 days a week. I said, how many applicants do you think I've got? I said, don't know. None. No, I can't get anyone to apply for it. Very interesting. We also talked about, at the beginning, about this Gen AI. That's going to really help potentially unlock this working from home and hybrid. By integrating AI into information sharing systems, remote workers can quickly locate necessary resources to complete tasks, reduce the time spent searching for those documents they need or waiting for colleagues to respond to queries. If you really want to sort of get into the sort of the what ChatGTP and Gen AI could potentially offer here, there's more coming up here. Forbes wrote quite an interesting article in September 23. And they sort of said, look, the advent of Chat GTP and Gen AI, we are really on the cusp of realizing the full potential of remote and hybrid working, reducing, if not eliminating, some of those benefits of the office visits. Maybe the jury's out on that, but it's something to think about here. It's not just a futuristic buzzword, it's here now, and it could be a real transformative force that reshapes our workforce. Right, so we've positioned all that. We've talked about those why we might not trust people. We've looked at some of that evidence there. Some of the tools that might even help enable hybrid working remote even further. How do we combat mistrust? That okay, I didn't see that as much there. What we tend to start with in our programs is talking about 3 types of equity that need to be provided, because what happens from that is it sort of filters down quite nicely. And I'm just going to share a little bit of that with you now. We talk about these 3 areas of participation equity, representation equity, and information equity. First of all, participation equity, ability to host, present, participate in meetings, regardless of where you are. So we have tools to enable that, of course. We've got raise hands, of course, polls. We've done some of that today. Got stuff on the chat there, Q&A, breakout rooms as well. That gives us a little bit more of an ordered and structured way of talking in distributed groups. But, and this is where the leadership course comes in, there does still remain that sort of in-person domination, poor turn-taking, people cutting over each other, and exaggerated communication bias between those that, of course, a bit more have a preference for introversion over those that have a preference for extroversion. So what am I saying is that it does need managing. And of course, that's what we talk about on the program. These things exist. What can we actively do to mitigate to a certain degree? And of course, yeah, moving on to representational equity. Can I be seen? Can I be heard and portrayed equally, whether I'm sitting here in Devon or I'm in London in the head office there? There is always that challenge of distortion. It's not always easy to solve that one. People dialing in remotely look absolutely enormous on the conference screen, whilst they're peering saying, "I can't even see who's in the room. And actually, can you hear me?" Very difficult to solve. CIPD say, well, a couple of people remote, everyone has to provide that equity by everyone dialing in. Whether we agree with that, and certain organisations say, well, we just don't do that because we just don't find it practical. That is actually their sort of canon, recommended approach for that. And the last one is about information equity, of course, regardless of whether, again, I'm at home or I'm in the office, do I have equal access to information? Is there a free flow of information so I can do that long-term thinking, collaboration, creativity, cooperation with my team? Where's the stuff? Where's the information? We're all in the office together. You can just, where is it? Oh, it's there. And I can maybe find stuff more easily. Of course, we've got these collaboration tools that are there, as long as everyone commits to putting stuff in there. Much more detail on the main program around that. And some of that filters down, again, just to give you a bit of a taste about some of the things that we're talking about here, is, of course, combating that mistrust is about focusing in on outcomes, not necessarily presenteeism. Having weekly or every 2-week one-to-one meetings, regular team touch points. And what I was saying to some participants the other day is, get all that stuff in the diary in January. Lock it all in. You can at least move it, but at least your team know, yeah, they are booked in every 10 working days. I've got a one-to-one to look potentially at some goals, long-term, but medium, but maybe short-term as well, that inform the direction of travel there. The other thing that we recommend, of course, is starting team meetings with online icebreakers. How are you feeling? Informal discussions and so on. One thing that does come up when I'm doing these is, what about surveillance software? It can be problematic. Andrew Filev is a tech writer in California, and he owns a company called the founder of For Good AI. And his contention was, at the end of the day, having bossware, that does erode trust anyway, and people start gaming the system. Doesn't necessarily recommend that. Starting to sort of undermine trust by using things like that. Better to have frequent touch points, agree maybe short-term goals and say, right, this is what you're working on. Let's pick up on that, get that mapped and tracked, spreadsheets, whatever you want to use, and just keep a regular cadence of catch-ups where you can. They don't have to be long either. This is one that we use, just thought I'd share that with you. And we sort of asked people, okay, let's just have a check-in here. How are people feeling? And give us a number and why. And we just spent a few minutes at the beginning of our regular team meetings, which is part of a team meetings governance for the year. How are we going to have these touch points? How are we going to fulfill the hybrid model? And we agree all that and then set that out for the year. And then finally, and I'll say a little bit more now about empathy and belonging. What we tend to do is, and sometimes we do this at the beginning and say, could you honestly say yes to some of these questions? Do I check in with my team members outside of just their work contributions? So how are you? That emotional connection bit. Do you know all the technology that you can use? Do you know when you should use certain things? Massive long email for something really, really complicated when you could just do a quick Teams call. It's much preferable. We kind of know that. So anything that's very, very data rich, just to call and have a chat with them. Massive long emails doesn't work. Does all the team members, no matter where they are on that day, do they get the same information? We have the meeting, we have a summary of it, we have a record of it, people can access that. So we ask them these questions through. That tends to be the sort of 101 best practice about making hybrid work. Is there a balance between people speaking and not speaking? Bringing in the quieter members there. Do I tune out distractions? I don't know if anyone's on the call that does actually facilitate meetings, or certainly you're doing trading. You can tell people, you can see their eyes flicking backwards and forwards and thinking, you're reading something, aren't you? So asking some of these questions starts to surface, oh, I really need to pay attention in certain areas there. What we always talk about with hybrid anyway is that one of the things that you're going to really, really need to do here is use a style of empathetic leadership. Some learning outcomes there around leading with empathy, really, really important. How does it, and we were talking about that yesterday, how does it differ from sympathy, um, and actually, it's one of the things that does come up is empathy is well understood as a sort of concept, but actually in practical terms, and I gave you that piece of data earlier on, it isn't received as empathy. So what is empathy then? So definition of empathy there, emotional identification with someone else. So what we're talking about, taking time to listen, to care, to understand, sitting with their feelings, looking out for people's well-being, communicating with transparency and kindness. There is a business case for this. There is definitely a business case for this. So let's talk about that. But before that, I'd like to get some more stuff on the chat here. Impact of low empathy. I'll share some of the figures with you now. But what do you see? Maybe you personally have been on the receiving end of low leadership empathy. What's the impact of it being low within your organisation, or some people just don't show any? What have you seen there? Keen to see some of that, and I'll share some of the figures with you right now. Yeah, Lorraine, thank you. Reduced productivity, zoning out, lack of engagement. You disengage, so like I'm really not sitting with how I'm feeling here. Work to rule, yeah, that's what I'm going to do. Interesting one on work to rule. I came across something quite interesting the other day called BMM, Bare Minimum Mondays. Has it come to this? Feeling like a number, not a person. I think we've all been on the receiving end of that, not being authentic to each other. Again, why do I show this? Because this is the why of any facilitation. So, well, why? Because the evidence shows that you can get more engagement, you can get more innovation if you're actually doing some of this stuff. So this is why you should be paying attention if you're attending as a participant. That this is going to make a real difference. As you say, Vanessa, reluctance to engage, be more open or authentic, more guarded behavior, sort of self-censoring. So the intellectual and emotional identification with another, it's good. Look at all those lovely figures. It's great. We can't argue with that. But, and I think you know this is coming. But this is about balance, and we'll talk about that. In withdrawal, that's yeah. Effects of too little empathy, and some of that is there in that chat. I've got time for this. Not listened to, frozen out, withdrawal, as you put there, not respected as an individual. But some of you definitely will be, there's 100 on the call, will definitely be the other side of it. Too little empathy, most people say, well, no, there should be empathy around this. But what we want to talk to our participants about is you can't take it all on. You will burn out if you do that. You've got to learn how to not take all of this stress on your own shoulders. How do we strike a nice, healthy balance? When do we sort of check into this empathy, but also when we're going home or walking away from that laptop and closing it if we're hybrid? That's enough. That's enough, because that's going to really, really start to stress out that over-identification. So we do talk a bit about that. We can't really talk about empathy if we're not really talking about Theresa Wiseman. Theresa Wiseman, for those who haven't come across a nursing scholar, and yeah, absolutely, Vanessa, that's spot on. And I mentioned that at the beginning. How do we show that sort of compassion? Empathy moves to compassion when you actually want to do something about it, but also you've got to get stuff done as well. I always feel like you're on some sort of balance board as a leader. You've got to think short term and long term. You've got to care, but you can't let this just get to you too much. This always is sort of slight pivoting all the time, and I think that's a great comment there. Thank you. Theresa Wiseman gives a sort of model or some thinking around what empathy is here. Seeing things through other people's eyes, seeing the world through their eyes, being non-judgmental, and communicating that understanding. And anyone that's come across, I mentioned to you yesterday, Brené Brown's YouTube video on the difference between sympathy and empathy, which is hilarious, by the way. It's a cartoon. But not using words like at least, or hey, it could be worse. Instead of, look, I know I've been there and it really hurts, or, it sounds like you're in a really, really tough place at the moment. Just let's talk about that. We go into much more and explore that in much more detail. So some stuff there about thinking about, okay, empathy, not too much empathy, a model of empathetic leadership that does couch that, okay, I've got to sort of look after myself here as well. Building belonging. I was sort of semi excited about this yesterday, really, or raving about it, because actually it's really important. Some of the learning outcomes are on the main program around building belonging. Now, this is a dedicated session. Michelle, thank you so much. Lovely. Enjoy the rest of your week. Nearly Friday, so we're nearly there. Thanks so much for your participation as well. One of the things that I found quite interesting, because I've always been facilitating for about 20 years, is this has sort of come to the fore. So I'm winding it more and more into my conversations. In fact, I was with a finance company on Tuesday. We're talking about, okay, we talk about alignment, we talk about engagement in your team, but what about belonging? How do you foster that? Because we all know it's a really important subject. So it's becoming more and more sort of not a nice to have, but actually this is fundamental to health and well-being and productivity. So let's get into this. What is it? What is it that we're talking about here? So we're talking about, we have an affinity. We feel happy and comfortable instead of that sort of shut out. I don't have a place here. Of course, we we all know that actually when we don't feel like we've got a place, we don't feel like we belong, we start to close down, we start to shut down, and we don't give our all. We do sort of self-protect a bit. So I'm clearly not in the in crowd here. I don't feel like a member. Quite an interesting article there, some work that Deloitte did around that, so elevating the workforce experience of the belonging relationship, because this is just so much come to the fore. So why is this so important? There's lots and lots of great stuff here. We've got Mayo Clinic, that non-profit American academic medical sort of center there, has written a lot about it. It does help with resilience, of course. You've got people that you can reach out to. You feel part of an in-group. In fact, the most protective factor around resilience tends to be your social support, and that speaks entirely to belonging. But there's a big business perspective and advantage here too, of course. It helps us to perform. It leads to huge benefits. I'm not going to sort of work my way through those now, but you can see that, great net promoter scores and so on. Turnover is down. And it's no wonder, I suppose, that organizations are looking to actively foster belonging in their people. Through LHH's work with clients, we often find that belonging tends to be higher, and just bear with me on this, where the group is homogenous. So where they share similar backgrounds, where they grew up, education, their beliefs and values. Of course, it's much easier to foster a sense of belonging sometimes with people that, people sometimes want mirrors. They go, well, this person's quite similar, but like, we connect. Similar social group, they think and behave in a similar way, similar norms, we're going to accept their ideas and contribution. Great, we've got belonging. But of course, that's not really what we want to do here. Organizations really need to be diverse. That's what we always talk about. So what does that really require? Because we're knocking that to one side, people really have to be quite proactive, and this requires dealing with people who have different mental models. That's why it requires some active work. I'm going to show you the model that we use to make sure we're building that belonging with a diverse an inclusive working environment. That's actually what we're about. But what I'm trying to say is that makes it more difficult. We've been working to build a model of belonging that hits the key elements to make sure that actually we don't want a homogenous workforce. We want people seeing things differently. So they're not going to have the same, they're not going to be the same social groups. They're not going to have similar norms. So what do we need to do about that to make sure that we are building that strong organization? So this is the model that we've developed here. Psychological safety and trust, creating an environment where people feel safe to speak up, people getting recognition, connecting, building those opportunities for people to actually connect with each other. And you can see how this really speaks to the hybrid as well. There's support and consultation here. So I feel that actually my team are supporting me, my line manager is supporting me, my perspectives are heard. I feel proud to work where I work at the moment. I'm part of an organization and my values align to the vision. And then I feel that actually I am treated with fairness as well. So what we do on the main program around building belonging is dive into these. We haven't got time to go through all of these together today, but I think one, and as I say, someone who facilitates a lot, as well as doing the consultancy side, psychological safety comes up so much. As can we do a deep dive into that? Can we talk about what it is to be psychologically safe and how that's going to enable the team? So let's talk a little bit about that as we're coming into the sort of closing stages of this taster around building psychological safety. I love that image. So what we talk about around psychological safety is about what we define it first of all, and we talk about that sort of definition of feeling like you're unique, you're safe to show up as you, that you won't be judged by offering opinions, so that you get real agency within your own work, and that you're not working in a fear-based organization, that you're working in an organization where you can voice opinion and your opinion is validated and valued. What we talk about with psychological safety are these universal safety needs. You might have come across some of David Rock's work called SCARF. People need status. They want certainty. They want autonomy. They want to relate to people and they want to be treated fairly. And we talk about these, and we talk about how leaders need to attend to these universal safety needs. Yes, people will have different tolerances for these, but how do leaders attend to these? Because these inform psychological safety. And actually, a lot of what they're doing already attends to this. Having connections with their team, having one-to-ones, having social time with their teams, making sure that there's transparency in how people are promoted, things like that. We talk about actually what informs David Rock's research here. And then you go, actually, I do this. It's great to hear why what I do works. So we talk very much about that. We talk about what might trigger for the participants their own universal safety needs, what might cause them to be, if they perceive somebody as being treated fairly. So we talk about that. So how do we handle our own triggers, and how do we notice when other people, and how does that feel? So how does that feel inside for you? So actually, what do we need to do with our teams to make sure we are attending to these? So then we talk about, okay, well, what are we going to do for our team as well? And as we sort of come towards the end of the session here, what we always like to do is that sort of practical, well, what's the grab bag for me here? What can I take away? What are the practical things I can do? So I'm just going to illustrate that here now for you. And here is about obviously being open, because you're being very open yourself. So what you're not getting people to is to self-censor. Opportunities to learn. It's okay to make mistakes, not deliberate mistakes, it's okay. Getting those quiet voices, hearing from different people, stretch assignments, feedback from all levels. Team member competency, you've all got value here. It's all great to great to see and have. Being humble, you can be courageous and humble at the same time, and being open to let's have this dialogue around feedback and criticism. Lots to say, lots to talk about. There we have it. So what I hope I've done here today is just to give you a flavour of how we engender that learning across these 5 different interventions that are talking to caring, they're talking to connection, and they're talking to the coaching piece as well. We do highlight the peer accountability sessions because clearly, if you're doing half a day with a team, there's a lot of information, there's a lot of reflection and so on, and we need to keep people coming back together to make sense of the learning that they're doing. It's so crucial. We find that really important at all the programs we do. Our participants say it's useful, our clients say it's useful as well. If you're just joining us for the first time, we couldn't make it yesterday. It would be remiss of me not to sort of mention what we do in the round at LHH. If it's your first time coming to see us online and talking to us here, interacting on the poll or on the chat here. So these are the sort of the areas that we deal with here. We like to help individuals, teams, and organisations find and prepare for what's next in the world of work. So we are moving at such a pace. So supporting clients through the entire talent journey, from maybe recruitment or within the career mobility piece, or to my piece here, obviously leadership development. So we're there to help organizations expand their capabilities and workers to build those better futures. Let's say a little bit more about leadership development. I'm bound to. I love it. So what do I do within my department here? Well, we do quite a lot, as you'd expect for such a global organization. We offer that full range of leadership development solutions. Talking there top left about assessments, of course, a full suite of assessments, highlighting the strengths of talent, or just looking at boosting interpersonal awareness. Moving down to the DE&I space, cool. Our fantastic Women in Leadership program that gets so many plaudits, to standalone modules. As I said before, we get just a lot of interest in the psychological safety piece anyway, or just talking about inclusive leadership in the rounds. We also work on the culture change piece there, diagnostics. The diagnostics then tend to inform those further interventions to align and strengthen the culture. Of course, it won't surprise you that we can offer a full suite of leadership development programs, starting at that sort of first-time leader. Always the most difficult turn of the rung on the ladder. I think it's always the most difficult one, people, to make sense of that. In fact, again, I was talking to somebody last week and saying, you know, he's just got such imposter syndrome. He can't believe he's been promoted from his peers to lead that team. And we were talking about some of those challenges around that. But we go all the way through to senior leader as well. Leading change, leading transformation, of course. And what we're also seeing, and I think it is on the back of COVID and so on, is this desire to have group and team coaching. We've lost our, inverted commas, villages. People want to get in the room and talk together and sense make. And we're seeing a big demand around group and team coaching, not necessarily the one-to-one, but actually more group and team coaching. Finally, there we got it, our bespoke team effectiveness, which we've been developing over the last 2 years. This approach for intact teams, whether a new team or you've got a new team leader there and you're struggling to align on common goals and need to enhance the team dynamic. And that's a team effectiveness that, of course, has got team coaching within it, but discrete interventions around that belonging and agility and connectedness, trying to make sure that those are all fulfilled to achieve productivity and a good team dynamic. There we have it. There may be questions that you have. We're right up on it on the hour. What I will do is just show you this. This is our connection there. So if you do want to contact us and you've got any reflections and thinking there, then please. I just want to have a look. Yeah, you got a question there, actually, Vanessa. Thank you. How do you evaluate the effectiveness of peer sessions? And we know how to set them and guide them. It's still their effectiveness very simply due to individual commitment. And it is very, very difficult to measure it. One of the things I would say around that is often you're exchanging anecdotal evidence from each other. So it is very, very difficult to work that out. But what I would say is that those sessions aren't just for about what they're saying to you about whether it's working or not. What we find is equally important is the peer-to-peer piece there as well, around actually what are they doing that I'm not doing. I think that that is really, really powerful, and that's what people and our clients say they also find really, really, really useful around that piece. Thank you. And thank you for the question. But inevitably with leadership development, whether it's people doing payback projects or shifting 360 feedback behaviors, so you measure at the beginning, measure at the end. Measurement is always one of those topics that you need to really, really drill down with the client over. What is it that you're looking for in terms of that shift? Thank you.